Hello. I hope today is a beautiful day for you wherever you are. It's pretty gorgeous for me here in Washington, and so I'm going to go ahead and leave the window open. The light might get weird in here at some point, but we're going to enjoy the sunshine while we can. Today what I wanted to do was go over one of my favorite back to school STEM challenges and give it the virtual treatment or the social distancing treatment. So I know that things have to change. And so I figured this was one of the ones that I thought, usually at this time of year, I'm getting excited about helping teachers figure out which STEM challenges might be a good fit for them. And I have a series of back to school challenges I like to use that incorporate apples, like the themes of the season, right? So, like apples and back to school supplies. And I know that has to change this year, but I don't think we have to throw everything out. So I was thinking about this challenge in particular, and I thought I would go through some ideas with you. And if you're watching, and whether you're watching live or you're watching after the fact, if you have suggestions or questions or comments, please add them no matter when you're watching. So I'm going to kind of go through what Apples Ahead, the name of the challenge that I'm going to be talking about today, what it was like in normal times, pre-pandemic, and then letting go of that so that we can make room for what it can become. And so I'm going to go through some modifications that you can make to do this in a social distancing environment. If you are doing sort of a hybrid or a blended, or you're fully back to school in classrooms with students. And then I'm going to go into how you would change it if you're fully remote and trying to do STEM challenges that way. I know we're going to have some obstacles with materials. You can't share them, obviously. And then also, if you're doing remote, your kids, you can't depend on them having materials. So how we can work around some of that. And then we'll do some wrap up. Okay. So if you have any questions along the way, let me know. So Apples Ahead, what it was is, you can see in the little picture up there, basically the students are in teams and they have to build a contraption that will balance an apple on their head. And then they compete in a relay race against other teams. Now, part of this already kind of works with our new scenarios, our new normal, because I was always freaked out about lice. So every kid had to make their own head device anyway. And we use really simple materials. We will be talking about materials in a minute, but every kid had their own device anyway. But one of the things that happens in the relay race is, teammate number one runs the course or does like an obstacle course, comes back, and then transfers the apple from their head to the next student's head. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do that because we are trying to avoid touching the same materials. And we also don't probably want to get within 6 feet, even if you have your masks on. So that won't work. So we're going to have to make some changes to it. And I have some good ideas, I think, that are going to work. So the first thing I had to do is let go of what that was. The way that I want to do it, the way that I've done it in the past, the way that I can see, actually I have a little picture for you, the way that I can sort of see the joy of the relay race. Let me move this out of the way for a second. These beautiful little moments, and these parents did sign waivers. These are from Kathy's classroom. Kathy, thank you. But I have to let go of that, because when I'm feeling very frustrated about the way things were, the way I want to do these things, and I know I can't do those things, it sort of seizes up my ability to think about the path forward and what, like I said, what this can become in this new environment. I think there are actually some really fun adjustments we can make. So letting go of what it was and trying to figure out what it can become, let's talk about some of the things that have to change with social distance classrooms. So you're actually seeing some of your kids in person, although you might not be seeing all of them, or maybe you do have a reasonably sized group of kids coming and you just happen to have the space in your room to keep them apart. The main thing that would have to change here is really just making sure there are additional materials. I'm going to dive really a little bit deeper into materials when we get into distance learning, because I think that's where the bigger issues happen. And so some of that can apply back to your social distancing classrooms as well. I also want to think about not using apples necessarily in this challenge, because food is scarce right now. And inevitably, when kids run this course, the apples fall, right? That's the whole thing, is trying to keep something that's on their head. and keep it from falling the entire time. So we don't want to actually ruin any food. So we'll talk about that in a moment. The main thing I think has to change here, if you are meeting with kids in classrooms, is the relay race portion. So you're not going to have them transferring the apple from one to the next or whatever you use in place of the apple. You're also not going to want to have them like tag hands or anything like that. So I was thinking one adjustment you could do for the relay race in this case is still take them out on the course, but space them out in rows. Like their team is in one row, team 2 is in another row, and they're 6 feet apart. And then instead of doing like a race where they're going somewhere and coming back, which you still could do without doing a handoff, but this is another option, is person 1 does a series of tasks, whatever it is. So maybe it's just like, maybe it's just like moving your arm like this, or standing on one leg, or squatting, or doing some kind of a motion like that. So like maybe a series of motions. And then perhaps if you have like a kickball, they could kick the ball to the next person in the line. And the next person has to stop the ball under their foot, do the same series of tasks or motions, and then kick the ball to the next person in their team, and they do that. And so then when everybody has done the series of tasks or motions, then you're done, and then that's, the winner. But what I usually actually also say with this particular challenge, and with any, if you're not like really wanting to start with a super competition, is just having teams time themselves and try to get better with each iteration of it. So they're never going to not be concerned with who won first place. They're just going to do that. But if you have them run the course more than one time and track their time each time, their goal is to just beat their previous time. That's all they're trying to do. So I think that could be a really nice option. You could also have everybody in the class stand up in the class or out on the yard somewhere and just almost do like a Simon Says, but with the apples on their heads. And you can do those like in team groups. And as long as any team has a member still standing, that team is in competition or they're still in the running or whatever. So that's another option. I'm going to give you some others that can work in this or distance learning environment in just a second too. But one of the things that I think is helpful, because, I think one of the things we're most missing or most concerned about is collaboration, right? How do we get kids to collaborate in these weird environments? So I think that having this part of like this, some sort of a task that they're doing as a team is helpful, but also they can plan as a team. So even if you have, maybe you don't distribute all the materials right away, but you say as a team, you're going to get, actually I should show you the picture let me show you the picture of the materials that we usually use, and then I can kind of talk to it a little bit better that way. Okay. So this is what, in an ideal situation, what it was, the kinds of materials that I would provide. I'd have apples. I would have some back to school supplies like folders or pencils. None of this is required. Lunch bags, just examples. And we're going to talk about substitutions for all of this. One of the things I think is really important is involving your students in solving this problem for you, right? It's not your job to figure out exactly how the STEM challenge needs to change. We can present that as part of the critical thinking task to our students and say things like, you know what, this is what we used to do. We used to have a relay race, but we have some new constraints this year. We can't hand off. We can't be within 6 feet of each other. What are some other ways we could test our apples ahead designs as a team that don't involve getting close to each other, that don't involve a handoff, and see what they come up with? Now that's up to you, and it also kind of depends on the age of your kids, but I think as much as you can this year, this is very relevant real world problem solving, and it involves them. So you should involve them to see if they can come up with some ideas, because they might come up with things that are way better than what I'm suggesting, and even what you might be thinking too. Jennifer, tennis balls instead of apples. I think that's a really good substitution. And I'm going to talk to you when we get to the distance learning part of it as well. I collected a box of things, and that's kind of one of the assignments I think would be good to give to students virtually. And so we'll talk about that in just a second. But one thing you might do is show a team like, hey, these are the materials I'm going to be providing for your whole team. And we need to figure out how you can divide them up amongst each other so that you can make sure you have enough. Everybody has enough to make their own thing. So negotiating use of materials is something they can do. They can all design their own head headgear, or they can do like a team one, a team design that they use for everybody. That's another option. I need a haircut so bad. Okay, so let me bring in actually in my distance learning. I might kind of go back and forth a little bit so that you can kind of pick and choose which ideas you want. But I think a lot of schools are doing distance learning. So I know that that's a big concern. So one of the first things that I would do in a distance learning environment is I would talk about the apple first. And I would explain what the challenge is. You need to design something that would balance an apple. But you're at your house and I don't know what you have. Maybe you don't have an apple. And even if you do have an apple, maybe your mom, dad won't want you to use it on your head because it could fall and get dented or cracked, and then you might not be able to eat it. So we don't want to waste food. So what I would maybe do is I would say, like, let's talk about this. What are the properties of this apple? What are the characteristics of it? So that we can then start to sort of figure out what we might substitute, right? So we would, think about, well, it's mostly round, right? We would think about the approximate maybe weight of it. We're not going to expect kids are going to have like scales at home that, necessarily they can measure the weight of it. But, enough of us have held an apple before that they probably have sort of a sense of what might be lighter versus heavier versus about the same, which is in itself just a discussion that can happen. And then what I would do is I would send them off after having that discussion of like, what are some of the properties? Smooth, it's round mostly, but not totally. It's about the size of a fist, so that could help as well. So using ways of figuring out how to like measure or describe without necessarily having the tools is one of the things that I like to focus on. I'm missing it. Being resourceful. So one of the things I would do is like go through some of the materials and say, but I would start with the apple. This might be all I do one day. Is we like talk about the apple, talk about the things, and then say, you could either say like, okay, now everybody has 5 minutes to go around your house and see if you can find some substitutions for an apple, or you can make it like, an independent task that they come back the next day with their examples. So I did this myself, and I went around and I collected a bunch of stuff. The next day, or, if you're going to do the 5 minutes and then come back, I might have them select, 3 to 5 of their objects to compare and contrast, and maybe even rate on how good of a substitution it is for an apple. But I got an empty water bottle because it's roundish, right? It's smallish. It would be hard to balance. I certainly can feel that it is hard to balance. It's pretty light, so maybe I should fill it up with water to get it more approximate or closer to the apple. I found a thing of Play-Doh that felt about the same size. It's a little flatter on the bottom than an apple, but even this kind of discussion, right, where you could have your kids, if you're allowed to put them in breakout rooms to discuss as a group, I would do that because I'm looking for ways that they can collaborate in any way. So even just having that discussion about, the pros and cons of this as a substitution and comparing and contrasting and giving each other ideas. I found plastic Easter eggs that I thought might be a good substitution. Anything roundish kind of was on my mind. It's too light, so we would definitely get like a negative rating for that because it's not the best substitution. I had a lemon, so I got that. Maybe a potato. But again, I don't want to waste food. So a ball, if you had I don't have a tennis ball, but I had this one. And then I had a couple other little things. I had a chapstick that's kind of egg-shaped. And even I was thinking like clean socks, like if you ball up the socks. It's a little easier to balance than an apple would be, but it's a possibility, right? And so even that, it's a simple critical thinking activity, right? It's the comparison, the contrast, the thinking about the attributes or the characteristics or the properties of the apple. It's a simple thing you can do to get going. One of the other, I had a rubber band ball. That's probably less likely for anybody else to have in their house than maybe a teacher would. One of the things that is kind of a necessary material for this challenge is something that you can sort of connect it to your head, be that rubber bands or string or pipe cleaners. Now, most kids aren't going to have pipe cleaners in their house. So this is another thing where you might even do this the same time that you do the apple. I like to start, I think it makes sense to start with the apple, just start with one thing and focus on one thing. Jennifer, yes, balling up like a piece of aluminum foil would be another thing that could be really effective for an apple replacement. So what I was thinking is, I might walk the students through. I never show them an example before they start, so I think that really inhibits creativity if they see samples of like a headgear. You don't get as many good different variations. But I might show them the next thing. You're going to need something to attach it to your head. So maybe like string, or maybe like pipe cleaners, or maybe like whatever can you look around and see what you have. Now some might have string, and that's great. But even if they have string, and even if they have an apple, I'm still tasking everybody with finding examples or samples of things in their house that they could use, because we're looking at being resourceful. And also, I don't want a kid to just be able to say, oh, I happen to have pipe cleaners, I happen to have the apple, I happen to have tape or whatever. I want them to have to work too. Even if they have access to the materials already that are like, the ideal materials, I want them thinking, and I want them doing the same tasks. And also when they come to share with their teammates what they came up with, somebody might get an idea that I was like, oh my goodness, I had it, right? Or I have something I can use. So maybe I have string, but maybe I have a ribbon. Maybe I can take my shoelaces out of my shoe because I'm just going to use it temporarily and it's not going to get ruined. And then I can put the shoelaces back in my shoe. So just thinking about ways they can be resourceful, I think, is a really, very cost-effective task here. And everybody, I think, just about everybody has something, right, that they'll be able to use. And if they don't have string and they don't have shoelaces and they don't have anything, I think when you have a group of kids come together and share their different ideas, they'll realize they probably have something that they can use. And then, I use a lunch bag is one of my materials, but it's really just paper, right? So junk mail, scratch paper, you've already used the lunch bag. You don't have to throw it away right away. Even like a chip bag, just something else that can sort of, serve as a material to sort of cushion, or that they can fold and put into a shape. One of the requirements is that the apple has to be showing. It can't be completely encased. So even if it was like plastic, it wouldn't count. You can't completely encase it. It has to be able to fall out, basically. And then one other thing I was thinking on this was a plastic bag. If you kind of got it into a ball shape and filled it tightly enough with, like, I don't know, beans or kernels, like popcorn kernels, they wouldn't get ruined because it would be encased in this. So you would be able to use it as food afterwards. I think it would be hard to get it tight enough to make it round enough, because if you think about like how a bean bag would sit, it would balance on your head pretty well without having to design much around it. So I didn't think that was as good a substitution, but I just wanted to show, like, you can come up with a lot of different ideas and then have them analyze. Like I said, compare, contrast, what's good about it, what's similar, how analogous is it to an apple really, and introduce some new vocabulary like that, physical properties and things like that. Okay, now the next thing that would be challenging, right, is now they've got their materials, and you'll give them their criteria and constraints. If you want to see like kind of all the background of this, I'll make sure that I link the YouTube video where I go through what Apples Ahead was, which will give you like the criteria and constraints list and some ways to adjust it if you want to do that. But I really want to focus in on what are the changes you'll have to make in order to make this work. So I'm going to bring the agenda back up just because I like having it on the side there so I don't lose my place of what I'm thinking. So the next thing is, if you're doing distance learning and you're trying to do a relay race after they've built, one thing I would love to do is have the kids get into teams. And whether that, again, if it's great if you can do a breakout room, but I know not all districts allow that because they require there be a teacher present if there's a student group happening like on Zoom or something like that. So I'll tell you the ideal first and then some adjustments. So ideally, students would break into their groups. They would go through their materials. They would talk about their designs before they built them. They're allowed to build it however they want, but they might hear from a teammate or see, a sketch and think, okay, well, I maybe want to try some of those things in my design as well. They go away, they design their contraption, they come back maybe on another day and they show their contraption to their teammates, but then I task them with deciding or figuring out how can we test these designs, because we're not with each other. We aren't going to do a relay race. So what are some alternates? And I would expect to hear some things maybe like, well, we all put the thing on and we all go down our hallway and come back, right? So we might jot down all these ideas. Brainstorming's fine. But later we're going to analyze and discuss, okay, is that a fair test, or is that an accurate test? And it depends on the answer. The answer really depends on if you're going to do the same thing every time. And as a team, you're really just testing, can we improve our time from one race to the next? Then as long as everybody's doing the same thing, that's fine. Now, if you want to compare team 1 to team 2, then we've got an issue, right? Because not everybody's hallways are going to be the same size. They might not, be able to do all the same things. So you can decide how rigid you want to be with your directions to them. What I sort of envision is that they create their own series of tasks that they have to all perform, and they perform them together, and they analyze, they maybe even keep a chart of, I did task A. You can record yourself maybe using Flipgrid or just your phone. You don't even have to time yourself until after. You can, when you go to play the video, you can then be looking at a timer, or, online there are sites that have countdown timers so that you can see how long it's taking you to do the tasks. So maybe it's as simple as, okay, well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to squat down and put our arms up. And then we're going to come back up, and we're going to put our arms to the side and bounce on one leg. And then we're going to bounce on the other leg. And we're going to go back and forth 5 times. And that's the thing we need to do. So it's kind of nice too, because it's getting them up and getting them moving. So it's, it's a little like PE, just, something to get them, especially if you need a break in the middle of your day, sort of this would be a good thing to do. They could come back and share out with the whole class. Here are the different ideas we had. And then even to select within a team, we tested out, or we tried out 10 different ideas, but these are the 5 that we're going to use as our final 5, motions or, ways of testing it, and then have them explain why they chose those things. You can have them do a shared Google slide where they're like putting down notes about each of their motions. You can have them present to the other groups their ideas, or you can have them, maybe on day 1 of the next week, team 1 comes up and says, everybody get your apples ahead contraption, and we're going to lead you through our 5 motions and see who's left standing at the end. And they do their thing. You could even say, if you want to lead them all and choose maybe your favorites, you could have everybody showing on Zoom, and you could even do things like, if you said like, oh, what's 5 times 6? And then they have to sort of make the motion with their body of like, that's the 30, right? And so they do the 3 and they do the 0. And so they have to like draw, basically thinking about their head as sort of like the pencil. Like maybe I would say, like, imagine you have a marker sticking out of your mouth, and there's a board right in front of you, and you want to draw the answer. So you need to be, I know it's going to be backwards because it's mirror image, but you need to figure out how would you draw 30. And you have to do that motion while you've got the apple on your head without it falling. And you obviously can't catch it. If it's going to fall, then it's going to fall. I kind of like, they could do like their teammates' names, or you could practice spelling words that way. Any kind of like quick answer questions, you could do that. Okay, let me see on my notes if I missed anything I wanted to share with you on these. I love the idea of them doing like, they might do dance moves or something like that. That could be fun. Okay, I think I did all those out of those. Don't show them examples. Don't forget that when they're analyzing and they're discussing and they're working with their teammates, some of the things they're doing are math and some of the things they're doing are ELA. So don't feel like you have to have this all pinned into your science minutes. You don't. And then I said the thing about the ball. I really like that idea of like, if you are in school, of like having them sort of like kick a ball to their next person in the team, because then that makes sure that the next person can't start their tasks or their movements until the ball gets to them and they have it stopped. So that feels like a good way of being fair. So, and I would have a lot of discussions about fairness. And that's partially create fair tests. So when we're comparing against teams, like what is fair, and having that debate. And I think those are some of the things that I would change. I think it can work. I think that part of why I love this challenge so much is it's very joyful at the beginning of the year, and they have to work as their team, right? Not just in their, in their designs, they have a little bit of flexibility to still be an individual. And then when they get to the tasks, or the race, then they have to be a little bit more working together. And because it's so much fun and such an experience, it's sort of, I don't know, to me, it's like a fast forward on sort of creating classroom culture. Like, this is a place where we do hard things, but we also have fun doing them. And so this was one I didn't want to let go of as I was thinking about this next school year. And I realized I don't think I do. I don't think we just have to get ourselves into a mind space where we can reimagine how it can look and figure out what are the things I really, really, really want to focus on and communicate to my students, and how do I want them to feel. So for me, the beginning of the year is a lot about the 4 C's. The whole year is, but at the beginning, I want to be thinking about, how do I help them collaborate? How do I help them communicate in this way? That's going to be tricky too, especially if you're not allowed to do breakout rooms. And in that case, if you aren't, if it's possible for you to do, either they could do maybe recordings. I think Flipgrid would work really well for this, where they can kind of communicate what they're thinking and their designs with their teammates and with you, or voice recording apps when they're doing their planning. Or maybe if you can stagger meetings with some of the other students or get parent volunteers to manage breakout rooms, if that's possible. But I do think that we can actually have this sort of like these joyful moments, I think, are so important more important than ever for us to find, because it's been a rough year for us and for students, so finding ways to make learning joyful and have them show up and not just feel like, okay, I'm sitting passively and like now I'm going to learn passively. Places where they can get up and they can, I imagine like all sorts of like zigzag moves. I know they have like crazy dance moves probably too, because I'm not a dancer, but kids always are. Sorry for that very loud truck that just went by. I'm sure you could hear that. And since I started doing STEM ideals, I try to pull those out and focus on them where they make sense as well. And I think being resourceful is a really big one. And like I said, I think one of the most crucial things is, even if kids have access to the resources, I still think it's a very valuable activity to say, that's great, you have an apple. I'd still like you to go and find 5 more things that could stand in for an apple. And then bring those back and let's share out and let's see how apple-like they are. So you can get a lot of little things done here, focusing in on like that critical thinking, that problem solving, that being resourceful, and then coming together and working as a team as well, with the planning, with the choosing their, I said their teammates' names. Like, they could actually, create their team name, and that could be another thing they try to sort of like motion with different movements. So let me know what your ideas are, or if you have any questions, or if I said something that you were just like, yeah, I mean, that's not going to work though. I always welcome you saying like, okay, if you have a situation where the ideas aren't going to still work for you, don't feel like it's rude to ask the question. Please do ask the question, because maybe there's just a situation I haven't really, I haven't thought about when I'm imagining how apples ahead could work. The other thing that's nice is that if you do apples ahead, a lot of the same materials I use in the other Apple back to school STEM challenges. So if the students have already worked through what sorts of resources that they have, material substitutions they have in their house for this one, they can probably use that again in a different STEM challenge of the same kind of series. So I will make sure, what I'll do is I'll link for you the playlist that has the 5 challenges. So you could watch, if you're not familiar with them, you can watch through them and see, maybe this isn't the one for you. Maybe you think you like one of the other ones better. For me, this one is just so joyful. So I love using it early on, but the other ones are fun too. And it's just that they aren't a relay race. For me, I don't know. I just love relay races. There's something about that energy that's like really great. But there are like simpler things like Apples Aloft, which is a tower with an apple on it. There's Apples Afar, which is a cantilever. As long as they've got like a table or something they can project something off of, that'll work. And there's Apple Annihilator, which is a wrecking ball. If they have paper towel tubes, that'd probably be the easiest thing to use. But you'll see when you watch them. And then Apple Ally, you know what? Honestly, I wouldn't do that one this year. Apple Ally is a little tough. And to do that one in a distance learning environment, even social distancing, because you really need everybody close in to work on that. I would skip Apple Ally this year. It's a great little challenge, but it's just, you have 4 other ones you could choose from, and they work just fine with these situations, I think. And that one would be just really pretty tough to change. So Jennifer wrote, maybe parents can take photos and email for kids. Yes. I think there are a lot of different like possibilities. So I think actually what I will say is if you have constraints I didn't consider, whether that's how students work together, which platforms you're allowed to have them use and all of that, let me know the details, and then I can think through it when I know what I'm dealing with. Does that make sense? All right. And let me know if you do end up doing this challenge and how it works. And again, if it doesn't work well for some reason, it's not rude to tell me that. This is STEM, there's some fails, and then we iterate and we make it better. So don't feel like you'd ever like be insulting me or something if it's just like you tried it and it was an epic fail. That's not a problem. It's not a problem if it's an epic fail, as long as we learn from it, right? I think one of the big things this year is just involve your students in solving problems related to your classroom. So every time you're going to do a challenge, if you're like, I don't know how this is going to work, then before you even do the challenge, you just involve the students in how could we do this differently so that we can meet the constraints we have right now with our classroom environment the way it is. No shared materials, probably social distancing or remote learning, but you still need to have the criteria, right? We still need to do this challenge. We still need to be able to test our designs and how does that work in this environment. Involve them, because I'll tell you what, sometimes I'm really shocked at the ideas that some kids, sometimes I think I've thought of every possibility. I've thought of all the really cool ways we could do this. And then kids will come back with something that's like, oh, that's such genius, and it never occurred to me. So, involve them, lighten your own load a little bit, okay? Because you don't have to do all the things. It's not helping them to help them, right? So what is helping them is to say like, hey, we've got a problem and we can solve it as a community and as a group together. So focus in on that collaboration, focus in on finding those little pockets of joy. And I say this to myself as much as I say to anybody else, learn to let go of how it was so that you can free up your mind to imagine how it can be, because it's not all bad. There can be a lot of really good things, I think, that come out of this. And even just some of taking the time to think is something simple as replacing an apple. And what is it that makes an apple an apple? In this case, why is it so hard for it to balance on your head? And it's not impossible, but it's hard. So what could replace it? It's just such a simple task, but it gets your brain cells firing, right? Okay, I'm going to stop. Let me know in the comments or reach out however you like. If you try it, how does it go? Even if it doesn't go well, I think it can though. And what did you do? Because it's going to help other people figure out how they might be able to use this in their classroom. As soon as I jump off, I will make sure to come back in and put the Back to School STEM Challenge playlist from YouTube in the comments so that you can go through and see, which ones you might want to do and how you might make changes on your own too. So I'm going to leave it there. Have a lovely evening. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.